welcome everybody to Wildlife and Water Friendly Gardens, our series for homeowners and those of you interested in being environmentally friendly, conscious gardeners. And my name is Michelle Scholes, and I work here at the Environmental Learning Center, which is on Clackamas Community College's grounds. We have a nice, beautiful 5-acre wetland site that you can see behind us, and it's free and open to the public if anyone wants to join us. I've been coordinating this program now, it's been 5 years, and so hopefully we've got it down and we've picked some topics that are of interest to you. We do run other programs here, so if you are so inclined to give a donation, you would be supporting educating children's programs, field trips and such, and some adult education that takes place here. So thank you to anyone who has donated, always welcome. So before I begin, I'd quickly like to thank our sponsor for this series. That's Clackamas Water Environment Services, and their financial support allows us to offer the programs for free. I'd also like to thank our partnering organizations who are helping with many of our introductions. We have Oak Lodge Water Services, Greater Oregon City Watershed Council, North Clackamas Watersheds Council, Tryon Creek Watershed Council, Clackamas River Basin Council, and Clackamas River Water Providers. And with that, I'll turn things over to Alexis from Tryon Creek Watershed Council, who will introduce our speakers. So I hope you enjoy. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Michelle. Thanks, everybody, and welcome. It's been fun to see your favorite trees rolling in on chat. Michelle already introduced me. I'm Alexis with the Tryon Creek Watershed Council. I'm just going to be doing a couple of things today. I'm going to provide you with some brief housekeeping notes. And the first of those is you all are doing an excellent job, which is to just please stay on mute during the presentation. And then the other thing, and you guys are practicing this already by submitting your favorite tree in chat, is during the course of Eric and Brian's presentations to please submit any questions on chat. I'll be moderating that and I'll be copying them over to then relay to Brian during the Q&A portion at the end of our presentations. The only other thing is towards the end, I'll put a couple of times a survey link in the chat for everybody. Your feedback on that survey link just helps Michelle and other good folks at the ELC to plan this series out. So please do fill that survey out. We'll be putting it in each week, and I'm excited to get back into the swing of things for this series. So with no further ado, I'll introduce Eric and Brian. So we're joined by Eric Butler with the Clackamas River Basin Council. And Eric is a landscape ecologist who's interested in protecting, restoring, and reconnecting ecosystems at the watershed scale. After years of seasonal and freelance work as an ecologist and botanist and stewardship technician and geographer in Oregon and beyond, Eric is excited for the opportunity to make a lasting difference in the Clackamas Basin. Eric, I would add as an aside that you already have. When not at work, Eric can usually be found volunteering on several boards and working groups, teaching environmental science, recreating outdoors, or just reading a good book. We also have Brian French. Brian is the principal at Arboriculture International and is a skilled climber with a broad range of arboriculture-related experience as a certified and qualified tree risk assessor. Brian has been practicing for over 24 years in Oregon and abroad, and is dedicated to and a contributor of research for a better understanding of trees, as well as their function and safer work practices for arborists. Brian is a climber and consulting arborist with a focus on wildlife tree retention and habitat programs. Serving as coordinator for the Oregon Champion Tree Registry and Portland Heritage Tree Program, much of Brian's work focuses on the preservation of significant old trees and associated flora and fauna. So with no further ado, we'll turn it over to Eric for our introduction, who will then pass it right along to Brian for our main presentation today. Thanks, everybody.
Hello, everyone. So I am someone who plants trees for a living. And in fact, this winter, I'm just about to get somewhere in the range of 53,000 native trees and shrubs in the ground. So I get to do this a lot. And climate resilience is one of the most complicated challenges I face as someone who does this for a living. I can't simply rely on looking at what is already growing at a site or what has worked in the past to guide my plans for a revegetation project. I really have to make a lot of difficult choices under conditions of great uncertainty. And these are choices about things like species, stock types, seed sources. Think a lot about genetic diversity and also about the kinds of site management I do to really have some assurance of success. And of course, what does success even mean now? And success for how long? Will there even be such a thing as a native plant if the climate is completely different in a few decades? I'm not saying there's no hope, far from it, but Albert Einstein famously said the problems of today can't be solved at the level of thinking that caused them. Thankfully, our presenter today, Brian French, is someone who is definitely thinking about these things at the level they demand. All right, take it away, Brian.
Sorry, I needed to unmute there. Thank you. I realized that was a segue. Thank you. Appreciate that, Eric. And thank you, Alexis. And yeah, I just wanted to also, let's see if I can move that. Just wanted to say welcome. Thank you. Looking forward to kicking off this series. And I'm also signing up to see all of the presenters through the whole series. So I'm really looking forward to that. And I wanted to also offer a special thank you to Michelle Scholes for inviting me here today to share. I'm learning as we go. So wanted to yeah, just start and talk about myself just for a minute and introduce myself as an arborist. I have been working in the Portland area for some time. Many arborists in our area are you know, our work is focusing on trees. So with our focus on trees, we are connecting to, you know, connecting with many different types of you know, tree related, you know, questions about human health and forest health. And we have urban foresters and folks who work with ecologists and as well as working with, you know, risks of trees in our community. But today our focus is going to be on climate change. I am not a climate change expert, but because trees are such a great indicator of climate change. That's kind of the focus of this presentation and what that means to our community here in the Willamette Valley. So wanted to also just share one of my favorite places to visit. This is the Disappearing Lake in Washington. My wife and I in this photograph are on a canoe. This is a northwest bayou that is full of water, just combining the idea of water and trees and how they're interconnected here. But every year this swells with water and returns to a vigorous wildlife meadow by July. This is a very fun place to see. And it's so active and dynamic if you ever get a chance to make it out there. I'm an individual working as a professional as an arborist among foresters, researchers, field biologists, and many more, worldwide focusing their careers on trees. And in the spirit of that, I can share how trees are helping with climate change. That being carbon absorption, soil stabilization. This is really important, especially when we're talking about waterways in anchoring the soil to the roots and helping prevent soil erosion, which can cause a lot of harm to our waterways, as well as water filtration and trees helping filter water and prevent flooding in areas where we don't want flooding. And then also wildlife habitat. Trees provide habitats for many species of wildlife. As we continue to face new challenges brought about by climate change, it's important that we consider all of these effects and considerations in our planning and the decisions that we're making. That is our collective efforts on managing tree populations in the Willamette Valley, I think will prove a defense to regional impacts and habitats through climate change. So I wanted to take you to or share with you an idea that I ran across a few years ago, a quote by Peter Kahn. And it's this idea that environmental generational amnesia is something that we all experience in life. And that is that we open our eyes to the world around us and we accept that as what is normal. So generations before may have experienced an environment that's very different than now, and generations in the future will certainly experience a very different environment than it is that we live now here in the Willamette Valley. And we accept those changes as normal, while soil degradation and development and urbanization and changing the environment around us continues. I also just would like to report, just to kind of like shed some light and some emphasis, that the United Nations reports with that the most likely doomsday sort of scenario that we are challenged with in our future is ecological collapse from anthropogenic influence as well as climate change. And so this is something that we are all burdened with, not just as an arborist. So the Willamette Valley is a great example of this idea of how the world is changing around us and how we may fit into that in our life. Does anybody ever wonder what the Willamette looked like 200 years ago or 100 years ago, maybe even 50 years ago? Was it different? The answer is yes. 200 years ago, the Willamette Valley would have been primarily an open oak savanna with grasslands dotted and scattered with Gary oak trees and groves of Douglas fir inhabiting, and groves of Doug fir adjacent or nearby, inhabited by the Kalapuya native tribe, with very few European settlers here. And the landscape would have been mostly untouched as far as large-scale agriculture, open with oak savannas with open grasslands scattered with Gary oaks, conifer forests along the edges, but mostly open throughout the valley, wet prairies with high nutrient wetlands, and beaver marshes, big beaver marshes. Beaverton was named after its great expansive beaver marshes that were full of water during raining seasons, and then a lot of them would dry out in the summer. But that water and where that water was vital to those ecosystems at that time, and beavers played an integral role in that. As well as meandering and serpentine rivers, over time, we've changed the way that a lot of those rivers move, and trees now play a very important role in that, which we'll talk about in a minute. So we're talking about arborists and the work I do, and this is a site out in Tigard, where this used to be a field of blackberries and invasives that's been changed and modified to being more available and present for beaver. And the ecology here has changed through a lot of work by professionals in that area. But this, you can see there was a tree dropped there. That was very intentional. We've been removing trees in this particular site. You can also see a lot of beaver damage or beavers working, depending on how you look at it, on the base of those cottonwoods. A very active site, and it's encouraging to be, an arborist and being able to work on projects like this, where we are going in and helping enhance these wildlife habitat and connected habitat areas. So when we're looking at climate change, and I don't know if there's a whole lot of good news to share when we're talking about climate change and trees in the Willamette Valley, but wanted to let's see if I can actually move this over just a little bit here. There we go. Wanted to share a few notable trees that you may or may not be familiar with in the Willamette Valley, but as an arborist, want to offer some information about what you should be looking out for and how these trees may affect you and your community. I also added an asterisk, put drought knot beetle in bold, underlined it in red, drought knot beetle. So these trees that we're seeing dying off in the Willamette Valley are beetles may be associated with that, but it's really these trees are dying in decline due to drought. In addition to drought, with western red cedar, grand fir, Douglas fir, black hawthorn, and red alder, some of these species, when we're looking back into our recent past, a couple hundred years ago, we had fire during that time. Periodic fires, once occurred in this area. Fire suppression has allowed for species like Douglas fir, grand fir, and western red cedar to take root into many challenging areas for these particular tree species, such as thin soils, hot south-facing slopes, and longer trees of these species can be found at higher elevations and cooler temperatures, and areas like northeast-facing slopes, such as Forest Park on the Highway 30 side, red alder and hemlock, Douglas fir, and even hemlock and western red cedar and grand fir are doing quite well in that area. Whereas on the southwest hills of Portland, we're seeing a lot of decline with these trees in particular. And the reason I wanted to also mention the drought knot beetle is just because I have heard some situations where treatments were offered for beetles to, correct or to, help these trees to somehow, kill the beetles that were there. But again, these are secondary beetles. These are not actually the primary issue with why these trees are dying. Additional threats, and I should also mention that human preference was also a reason that a lot of those conifers now exist in those areas. But additional threats to trees in our area, and these are real threats because we just talked about not including black hawthorn and red alder, but we talked about three of these trees, these really important conifers that climate change is impacting, and droughts are absolutely impacting the populations of these trees, but that there's additional threats that we're also looking at, which is some of these invasive species like Mediterranean oak borer. And we're really relying on oak trees and some of these other trees in the Willamette Valley because the Willamette Valley is really set up mostly for the presence of these oak trees. This is Mediterranean oak borer. Some of the symptoms that you might find with this tree is white boring dust at eye level or at the base of the tree, as well as parts of the crown starting to die back. If you see Oregon white oaks that are showing symptoms like this, you want to report that to ODF, who has a monitoring. Oh, sorry, I was one step ahead here. So here are some of those symptoms. And if you do find trees showing those symptoms, you'd want to report those to ODF. Oregon Department of Forestry also has a map. They are monitoring for this particular threat to our oak species. And there's a lot of questions about the fate of these trees in the Willamette Valley. But we are still planting a lot of Oregon white oaks. But one of the things to note as well is that drought stress can reduce defenses against pests, this particular pest. And even drought-tolerant trees such as oak can benefit from a little bit of watering in the summer. Now, we don't want to overwater because there are other issues with overwatering oak trees and armillaria, but there are some recommendations in more drought areas with higher concerns of drought that we would offer these trees a little bit of water during the hottest months of the season. I should also mention that if you're interested and you just look up Mediterranean oak borer survey field maps for the public, that is available through ODF if you're wanting to see that. Emerald ash borer is absolutely a major concern right now, especially for our waterways and the other additional complex concerns with climate change. That is that these trees our fraxinus, our Oregon white ash, are usually associated with wetter riparian zones in our valley, providing shade and temperature control for understory plant, woodland ecosystems, and water. And water being, I guess, one of the major concerns there after these ash trees are gone. What are these areas going to look like? And warmer water from EAB-induced loss of ash trees can increase solar radiation and stream temperatures. It can reduce dissolved oxygen. Warmer water can reduce dissolved oxygen levels, which can harm salmon and reduce prey for juvenile salmon that depend on microinvertebrate. Water temperatures for salmon exceeding 64 degrees is dangerous. So, or certainly above 68 degrees and can even be lethal at 70 degrees. So these trees being associated with riparian zones and potential threats to those temperatures of water is one of the main concerns. I'd also like to mention with EAB that in August 2024, a permanent quarantine was extended from Washington to Yamhill, Marion, and Clackamas counties. Quarantine prohibits materials from all plants of ash, so moving firewood or any sort of unchipped or properly processed wood, as well as olive trees. So olive is one of the trees that we've been wanting to plant more of in the Willamette Valley, and we're actually not going to be moving these from county to county to be planting these in our gardens for some time. So these ash woodlands, so this is a really great example of what that looks like in the wintertime. In the summer, this would be shaded, but that's carob subnupta, a grass that grows below the overstory in this particular type of environment. And ash woodlands offer shade for important amphibians and habitats that flood annually and develop vernal pooling. And these pools that dry out during the summer are essential for species like fairy shrimp, which turn into an important food source for many birds, but also many amphibians and terrestrial wildlife depend on these ecosystems. Additional concerns in this area is going to be pressure from invasives like Armenian blackberry, English hawthorn, and holly. So with these areas of concern, and as Eric has been doing, sounds like a great job for years, and is this need for shade from these trees and the need for replanting. So this is an example here of some work that we're doing with Jackson Bottom Wetland Preserve. It's a 600-acre wetland managed for wildlife located in Hillsborough. Excellent for birding if you ever get a chance to go out there. And this is from the climber's eye view. Again, I'm a tree climber, looking out across the preserve. Most of these trees that you can see up until about the horizon have all been planted since the early 2000s by staff there. These are a mixture of willow and some native ash, mixed willow species, black hawthorn, and young cottonwoods in this photo. So this is the type of work that we're really needing to do in these areas as we're confronted with the loss of overstory shade from ash trees. This is a small example of some of the work we're doing. So while we're opening up and taking a lot of these trees out, these ash trees ahead of EAB, emerald ash borer, we're also using a lot of these tree parts for habitat. So Ben on the left there is creating a habitat snag, and on the right, the photo on the right, Ben and I are up in the top of this tree putting a hawk nest, kind of like a platform or a collecting lots of branches to create an area for hawks to live, but also creating a lot of open areas for sunlight for this winter's planting with other species, of course. This is another photo of some of the work we're doing where we're creating and putting in cavities in these trees for nesting birds that otherwise may need to wait for several years for these trees to die and the space become available. We're kind of speeding those home options for reproduction for these species. We're speeding that process up by using our chainsaws to create these cavities. So some trees that, some alternative, ash trees that we could be planting if we're thinking about that is, and I'll go ahead and mention that this is available at Oregon State University, and you can look at basically just looking up alternative trees for planting for emerald ash borer. Planting trees for the waterways will offer shade for fish, help compete with invasive species, again, like Armenian blackberry. Having these trees in these areas will defend that space and continue habitat in these critical areas for, again, cooling the water temperatures. I know that a lot of the folks here may live in Clackamas County, and so I wanted to also touch on the fact that if you're a property owner, if you live near ash trees, and you're wanting to answer some questions about what you can be doing around these areas for those waterways, I highly recommend reaching out to Clackamas Soil and Water Conservation District. They're available to look at your property and help answer questions about that. In addition, if you live in urban areas, and you wanted to connect with the Backyard Habitat Program and join tens of thousands of people and other properties increase in wildlife habitat and biodiversity in their backyards, that's a really great program to connect with as well. Well, we can't not talk about fire. I am not an expert on fire, but I can't not talk about fire when we're talking about climate change and the and trees and vegetation. One of the things I wanted to really point out about fire in the Pacific Northwest is, and the fires that we've had, recently, is that it really has a lot to do with the conditions for those fires. So hot, dry summers with low humidity, when the winds pick up, and as well as human activity. So in the future, arborists will certainly play a greater role in answering questions about fire. We have training programs that are being developed for arborists to better understand and communicate about fire potential, defendable space in rural areas, and managing and adapting landscapes around fire. I'll also point out that when we're looking at trees and potential for fire, there's a few things that we can do that is common practice for arborists, helping property owners in providing building clearance from trees for our homes. In areas where we have a greater fire risk, we may want to look at fire adapted landscaping. You can take a look at that and see what that looks like. Replacing flammable plants with less flammable plants. So flammable plants such as Armenian blackberry, Scotch broom, and Leyland cypress. These are, in my opinion, not trees that we need in our or plants that we need in our community, and are higher flammability to those plants than other shrubs and plants that are non-coniferous. I think one of the things I should also point out is just barbecues. We do have several barbecue incidents a year in the Portland area. Keeping barbecues from vegetation and even from your deck or away from the home, and monitoring your barbecue would really help lower that risk of fire. As well as banning sales of and use of fireworks during fire season. Fireworks keep me up at night. 4th of July used to just be the noise, but it's actually a pretty big stressor for me as a person who works on trees, who does have some background with fire, and understands how severe and how susceptible trees can be during that hottest part of our drought season. I receive an increasing number of requests for tree removals from folks who fear the risk of fire. Yet during fire season, we fire thousands of these explosives in the air, raining embers onto our cities and vegetation. And I consider that a greater threat to our safety as an arborist than I do the trees themselves. So when I'm looking at trees in our urban environment, I'm also looking at those points of ignition and seeing if we can reduce those rather than removing our trees. When we're planting trees, we may consider planting fire-adapted trees. You're going to see white oak come up several times in this presentation, but Oregon white oak, Willamette Valley ponderosa, pine, Douglas fir, cottonwood, big leaf maple, white alder. Oregon white ash would have been a great plant for this, but we are not planting Oregon white ash anymore at this time because of EAB. So looking at those oak habitats and considering like what can we be doing to help with that, we can definitely take a look at diagrams like this that show the presence and population of oak groves in the 1850s compared to 2018, and see that we've lost an estimated 90% of our oak habitats and 98% loss of our oak and prairie habitats. And so urban development, intensive forestry, agriculture management, and fire exclusion, these are some of those factors that have led to this. But that doesn't mean that we can't, you know, adapt and plant more oak trees. And so just wanted to give a shout out to all of the professionals out there that are working on that in the Willamette Valley and reestablishing these areas on private properties and public properties. Um, and then wanted to also just kind of showcase a couple of my favorite places to see oak in their habitat. This one above here is on Sauvie Island. And this is a great place to do a walking tour. It's an oak, I think it's called the Sauvie Island Oak Island Loop. But this is a really great place to see Oregon white oaks, as well as Bush's Pasture Park in Salem. And that is all camas down there blooming below those oaks. So when we're looking at all of these different factors that can affect our trees, one of the things that we want to do while planting trees is also retaining the trees that we can. Oak trees in particular are very resilient. They have the ability to, this slide I'm sharing with you right now is actually of English white oaks, but Oregon white oaks are capable of doing a similar thing here in that with ice damage as well as fire, even those crowded Oregon white oak groves, because of fire suppression, those crowded groves with Douglas fir, where we're going in and taking a lot of those Douglas firs out and releasing these skinny, kind of sad looking oak trees, they have the ability to grow new parts and even lose some of those older, more mature parts of the tree. We call that crown retrenchment when the tree is dying back, and crown succession when the tree actually grows new parts. And our Oregon white oaks are not only capable, but they're very good at this. Here's some examples of that occurring here in the Willamette Valley. This photo on the left is in Molalla, Oregon, on a farm where a large portion of this tree has failed and is no longer here, and the tree is growing new parts down below. Trees can continue to do this for hundreds of years. These oak trees can lose parts and grow new parts. And I'm bringing this up because, in particular, the ice storm in 2021, I think it was. We had an ice storm here in the Willamette Valley that just it really had a big effect on our oak trees and the crowns of our oak trees. And some of these trees were being cut down, but it's not necessary to do that. And so as arborists are doing this work to preserve these trees and communicate to property owners, we can allow these trees to go through this these crown succession stages in their life. And they can have several stages of crown succession in one tree's life. So this middle photograph is just showing where that is happening right now. And then the photograph on the right is after that has already happened. And this is a natural process of oak trees. Another thing I wanted to touch on is both with oak trees, but all trees, is structural deadwood. So these trees are building a system to support themselves in their oldest stages of life. And you can see these big knobby areas where the branch collar has developed around the deadwood, setting the tree up for later stages of life. That wood in those collar developed areas is very expensive for the tree, but it's also some of the hardest wood of the tree. And so by that structural structural development, these trees can actually be stronger in their oldest and later stages of their life. In addition, it also increases biodiversity. So as arborists, we're often removing deadwood when we're looking at risks, but we have a common phrase, which is no risk, sorry, no target, no risk. And also, if we can hang a Volkswagen Bug off of one of those dead branches, then we certainly don't need to remove it. And we get all of those other benefits by leaving the dead branches on our oak trees.
Hey, Brian, I'm coming off mute just to let you know that we're at about that 5-minute mark for you.
Perfect. Thank you, Alexis.
Got it.
So this is an oak tree here just up the hill from me. I live in Clackamas County. This is a tree I've been working on. This tree we worked on before it failed, or sorry, before the ice storm, with concerns about it failing. That middle photograph is showing included bark. One of the things as an arborist, I can't give this presentation and not, offer some information about included bark, but it's this sort of like crack that develops in between large stems. The photograph on the left is showing the structure of a tree that might exhibit included bark, and that's a tree that has codominant stems. So when we see trees with multiple stems originating from the same place, sometimes we can end up with included bark. This is a textbook failure. It's really easy for arborists to solve. So if you look up included bark and familiarize yourself with included bark, contact your arborists if you do see included bark. We can keep the trees like that around. And sometimes that will mean that we'll definitely be offering crown reduction pruning, but in some cases we will need to add bracing systems, which is that photograph on the right. That's a supporting cable to keep that tree together. I'm really glad that we were able to get to this tree before the ice storm. This tree didn't have any failures during the ice storm, which was a significant ice storm. And the oak trees were certainly susceptible to the ice damage from that particular ice storm. And this tree did well because we were able to get to it ahead of time. And my last slide here, I just wanted to share with you a program in Lake Oswego that is developing. It's an oak strategic action plan in Lake Oswego, mapping all of the native Oregon white oaks throughout the city of Lake Oswego, and offering community outreach and engagement to teach members of the community how to better take care of or how to care for oak trees in particularly, and offering stewardship programs, and then again mapping and monitoring these trees. They will be planting a lot of oaks as well in that area to reestablish some of these oak habitats. And thank you. With that, I wanted to give it back to Alexis, I think.
Thank you so much, Brian. That's great. Let's see. So I'm dealing with a little funky thing in Zoom where I can't copy and paste the link for evaluations, which I was queuing up. So I've typed it in manually, and I'm hoping that that works. But Michelle, please let me know or follow up with the correct link if that one doesn't do it.
Sure, sure as well.
Thanks so much. So yeah, Brian, we've had a couple of questions come through, and everyone in the room, you're invited to please feel free to send more in the chat. I'm going to read a couple of questions. We have some species specific questions and some specific recommendations. One question that seems more overarching for folks is, how do you recommend applying water to large drought stressed trees or perhaps drought vulnerable trees?
Well, yes, that's a great question. Remember that the roots of the tree are not necessarily, the roots that are taking up the water are not at the base of the tree on the trunk. And that's actually the area we wouldn't want to be watering for our bigger mature trees. We want to broadcast that water during the summer of trees that we're concerned with stress, that is. And because of Mediterranean oak borer. Had it not been for Mediterranean oak borer, I wouldn't be recommending watering your oak trees because that has been our recommendation up until now. So this is really about reducing stress on that particular species for this time. As Eric said, um, we are adapting and experimenting, and we don't know how all of this is going to work out, but we certainly can try to work around and reduce stresses for these trees. So deep watering and broadcasting in a large area for big trees, if that's what we're talking about, and only, twice a year, during the hottest time of the year, so we're not out there every day watering these, not once a week, not twice a week, maybe more like once a month. And that's because we're looking at the difference between sometimes on hotter years, when it stops raining in April and we're at 100 degrees in May, and it doesn't rain until we don't get a substantial rain until November. And the temperature has been over 90 degrees during the middle of our summer, extended for 6 weeks straight. That's a lot of stress for these trees. That's the time when we want to go out and water those. This last year, we probably wouldn't have really needed to water, but maybe once if we were wanting to look at a tree that might be exposed to more stress from drought.
Mm-hmm. Would you recommend watering more newly planted trees more frequently?
Newly planted trees are trees that are going to be establishing. So the first 3 years of newly planted trees, we absolutely want to offer them water and sometimes more frequently.
Thank you. Let's see. I think I'll keep choosing the order in which to share these questions, and I think I'll keep us kind of in the drought conversation. Someone was asking, is late summer leaf drop on madrones, and is the yellowing of foliage on cedars and firs due to dry conditions? And is that something watering would help, or is that considered normal?
Um, so this is
Multi-fold question. I can
yes.
repeat it.
Um, yeah, so no, I would say that when we have yellowing foliage in the late summer and into fall, that's normal for these plants. What we would be wanting to look at is the new growth at the tips and seeing how the last 2 to 3 years have been growing on evergreen trees such as those. So if we have branches or leaves yellowing towards the tips of the branches, and we have trees that have smaller leaf size. When we look up at our conifers, if we can see a blue sky through the crown of the tree, and the foliage is less dense than it used to be, that's where we're starting to see effects of drought and the symptoms of drought really taking hold in these trees. And at that time, it's complicated. So I would really reach out to an arborist at that time, and not just take what I'm saying right now broadly as what you should absolutely do.
Right. In Western red cedars, how can you tell if browning and crown death is from drought or fungus?
Um, Again, so our Western red cedars that are dying throughout this area since about 2015 is due to drought. I just leave that there.
Great, thank you. Not great, but you know what I mean. Let's see.
I'll also add that, drought is something that we experience here in Oregon that we're familiar with during our summers, but again, going back to how the Willamette Valley was set up with water and hydrology, 50, 100 years ago, and the way that that functions now is very different. So those changes are also influencing how these trees experience drought, not just the looking at it as like, oh, this is climate change, so it's hotter, so these trees are having more stresses. It's a uh, um, several factors playing into this scenario.
Thank you. Someone chimed in who's from Ontario, Canada, where they've been dealing for over 20 years with emerald ash borer. And they were wondering, the question, Brian, was if your organization is trying to remove Oregon ash as a means of stopping EAB. And I think that question, I might tweak it or prompt you to maybe discuss the roles that different organizations and entities could be having in Clackamas County.
Oh, in Clackamas County.
Well, sorry. One thing for the good of the audience in the room is we know that folks are tuning in from beyond Clackamas County, but a lot of work with EAB is happening in surrounding counties. So, Brian, I would just invite you to speak about what is and isn't happening as far as removing Oregon ash relating to EAB.
So we are, as I have been informed, we're looking at a great loss of this particular species. So 96% of these, or an estimated 6% of these trees in the Willamette Valley will be affected, and will end up reaching mortality with the presence of EAB. So no, I'm not removing trees to reduce the likelihood of EAB spreading. We're removing trees before EAB has even gotten there. And that's so that we can go in and plant other species of trees in these areas. Now, uh, uh, our Oregon white ash, even though these die back, we do expect that they're still going to grow and that the species will still be here. It will just serve as a or exist as a different function in our ecosystems than it did before as an overstory creating shade. It may be something that's much smaller in our ecosystems now. So we're removing those trees ahead of time to get the shade in there so that we can folks like Eric can go in and plant an abundance of these trees along these waterways to get shade to our water. And I'm not actually familiar at this time with any organization in Clackamas County that is actively going out and doing this work in Clackamas County. Most of the work I've been doing at this time is with Clean Water Services and municipalities like the city of Hillsborough.
And speaking of the work out in Washington County, what trees do you know are being replanted in Jackson Bottom after removing ash?
Yeah, oh, great question. Yeah, so that photograph from it'll be kind of similar to what we're seeing, but I think I shared a slide that we were looking at alternatives for EAB. See if I can just get to that real quick. Are you able to see my screen at all?
Yes, we can see your
Oh.
shuffling through the slides.
These are of those trees. I think all of these are being planted in there. Other than Grand Fir, I think even Western Red Cedar is still being planted in there.
Mhm.
But all of these are species that are being planted back into those areas.
Thank you. The resolution on the slide is a little low, and so for the group, we're going to be following up with some links to resources that Brian might have mentioned. And Brian, if you're okay with us sharing your slide, I'm going to assume that the resolution will come through there. Otherwise, I would request this photo specifically, maybe.
Okay. Did you want me to read any of those?
I don't think so. We're getting kind of low on
Great.
time here. There's a bit more in chat about what the Urban Forestry in Vancouver are doing regarding EAB. We've had several questions kind of come through, and then folks are chiming in chat to answer things like specific recommendations and questions on a species by species basis. And one thing that I wanted to see if you have anything. I'm sorting through these in my brain. One of the questions is about any recommendations for evergreen or conifer trees to plant in neighborhoods instead of deciduous trees like oaks. And I'm curious if you'll name any of the three that were listed, or if you have any beyond those. I can tell you they're ponderosa pines, giant sequoia, and deodar cedar were what were suggested. Do you have any other evergreens that you would recommend for neighborhoods?
I think I have something better than that. Sean Hogan at Sistis Nursery is probably the person I would send folks to connect about planting evergreens in our neighborhoods for all of the different subjects we were talking about throughout this presentation. So um, he's really the person I've referred to over the years about that. But yeah, yes, Deodar cedar is a tree that we we don't have a whole lot of concerns necessarily with climate change in the Willamette Valley. Willamette Valley ponderosa pine is a great tree, and the other one was a sequoia, like a sequoia dendron. We do have some sequoias that are doing well here, but sequoia is also a tree that does require, access to water. So depending on where we're looking at the site, the site really tells us a lot about what types of plants. And again, connecting with a professional to talk about not just trees that we can plant all over Portland, but what each site needs, because we're talking about soils and hydrology and all different sorts of microclimate factors that would guide us to what we may choose in a particular site or not. But I don't see an issue with any of those. There are hundreds of evergreen trees we could take a look at that that are absolutely appropriate to be planting in the Portland area right now.
Cool, thank you. Someone has a speaking of newly planted trees, someone has a newly planted alder in their urban backyard and are watering weekly between May and October, and wondering if there's anything else they can do. And so this might apply broadly for folks with newly planted trees and plants. Anything else to do beyond watering to help our trees be more climate resilient?
I missed the beginning of that question. What type of tree?
This is an alder.
Oh, like a red alder?
I'm going to assume they didn't specify which kind.
And this is a young yet red alder?
It just says newly planted alder.
Okay.
But if you, yeah, I would just maybe speak to what beyond watering to do for resilience.
So again, the site that we choose for the trees, if they are having a hard time, older trees or younger trees, they don't have the ability to uproot and walk down to the creek and put themselves back into the soil so they can be in an appropriate site. So if we're looking at red alder likes wet conditions, and they are somewhat clay intolerant. So they want more well-drained soils, next to riparian zones, like rocky riparian zones, is where they really seem to do best.
Awesome. Could you speak broadly to sort of the one size fits all benefits of mulching?
Of mulching. Well, arborist chips are great. So arborist chips are very popular. I rarely have arborist chips at the end of the day. And if I do, I have about 60 people waiting for chips at any point during the year. Arborist chips are great. So yeah, using those, adding, removing our turf lawns, and if we want to have meadows, planting, native meadowscaping and working with native pollinators is great. And outside of those areas, using chips around trees to add where we may have a lack of decomposition or wood decomposing at the superficial level of our soil surface. And with that too, I will go ahead and say that downed woody debris is something that we're really starting to, or we have been for a while, that we're in these areas where we might add some chips and a couple sword ferns below the shade of a tree. We're also depositing branches and wood from when we're pruning trees into those landscapes to break down as well and offer habitat for terrestrial species like amphibians and insects that rely on that type of coarse woody debris.
Mhm. Thank you so much. Someone in chat had asked whether they should remove the holly trees that are cropping up along their property, and I explained that I replied to them in chat and said that that's a non-native plant, and so I would recommend removing it. And then someone else asked if you could speak about English ivy. So I wonder if you could talk about maybe some of the you mentioned Armenian blackberry earlier. Could you speak a little bit about the interplay of non-native and invasive plants with our native trees and shrubs?
Sure. Our biggest concern with our non-native invasive species is that they actually displace our native species. So they occupy that space and they root in and shade or overwhelm our native species. So that's our main reason for removing invasive species to help keep native ecosystems intact. And then areas that are overrun with invasives, we're removing those so that we can go in and try to restore those areas by planting native vegetation into those areas. And a lot of this work is absolutely in your backyard. Again, the Backyard Habitat Program is a really great program that will walk you through the process and how to do that and offers resources for professionals like arborists, landscape designers, and landscape architects that can work with you on answering those questions about how to go about doing that. There can be tricky situations where removing all of the ivy and holly, but without planting, we end up getting into uh, uh, areas that are exposed where other invasives move in. And so, working with a professional on that can help answer those questions can prove to be more successful.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. The Backyard Habitat Program, Backyard Habitat Certification Program is one of the links that we'll send as follow-up to everybody. And then we have had a couple of people ask questions chiming in from Bend or Eastern Oregon. And so I would just also say broadly that soil and water conservation districts provide resources across Oregon. And there's also relatively extensive coverage of watershed councils across Oregon too. So Backyard Habitats is great, and all of these resources can be layered and dipped into, multiple layers of wisdom at different organizations. So the chat has kind of slowed down as far as new questions coming through. So I think, Brian, that we're pretty much ready to wrap up here. And I wanted to also, Eric, thank you so much for chiming in on chat and providing folks one-on-one answers as we've been going. It's been really great and has helped streamline our discussion. I put the feedback link in chat, and we're looking forward to seeing you guys next week. We'll be talking about the impact of land use changes on bird species. Anything from Michelle before we wrap up?
Can you hear me? Yeah. I just wanted to add that we will be sending out the recording link and all of the resources that were mentioned today. And a huge thank you to Brian and to Eric for a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. Lovely to see you again. All right. We'll see you next time.